Blake Morrison adjusted his custom brioni tie as he waited at the reserved table in Lumiere, New York's most exclusive restaurant. The 40-year-old tech mogul checked his watch, a rare Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's annual salary, with mild irritation. His blind date was 7 minutes late. In his world of billion-dollar acquisitions and board meetings, punctuality wasn't just a courtesy, it was currency. "Would you care for another drink while you wait, Mr. Morrison?" asked the sommelier, hovering respectfully at his elbow. "The Macallan 25, neat," Blake replied, barely glancing up from his phone where notifications from his empire, Morrison Technologies, continued to accumulate. He'd only agreed to this setup because his sister Hannah had been relentless, insisting he needed someone real in his life. After his divorce 3 years ago, Blake had buried himself in work, turning a successful company into a tech giant that had revolutionized clean energy storage. Romance had become an afterthought, scheduled between conference calls and international flights. The crystal tumbler of amber liquid appeared at his elbow just as a woman approached his table. Blake looked up, his practiced smile already in place, the one he used for investors and press conferences. But the smile faltered slightly as he took in the woman standing before him. She was striking rather than conventionally beautiful, tall and slender, with chestnut hair that fell in loose waves past her shoulders. She wore a simple black dress that suggested quality rather than flash, but it was her eyes that caught him off guard, deep green and somehow familiar, looking at him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through his carefully constructed facade. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying a slight rasp that he found unexpectedly appealing. "I'm Amelia Bryant. Thank you for agreeing to this arrangement." Blake stood, his manners automatic. "The pleasure's mine. Though I should warn you, my sister tends to oversell my charming personality." He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please." As she sat, Blake noticed she didn't have the usual nervousness he'd come to expect from women meeting him for the first time. No wide-eyed recognition of his wealth or status, no subtle adjustments to hair or clothes. Instead, she studied him with a calm assessment that made him feel like he was the one being interviewed. The waiter appeared, and Amelia ordered a gin martini with 2 olives, no hesitation. When he left, she turned those green eyes back to Blake. "You don't recognize me, do you?" she asked, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Blake paused, the glass of whiskey halfway to his lips. He studied her more carefully now, searching for anything that might place her in his memory. Had she worked for him? Was she an investor he'd forgotten? A journalist he'd snubbed? "I'm sorry," he admitted finally. "Should I?" Amelia's smile deepened, revealing a slight dimple in her right cheek. "No, I suppose not. It was a long time ago, and I looked quite different then." She accepted her martini from the waiter with a quiet, "Thank you," before continuing. "Let's just say we knew each other in another life." Something in her tone, a mixture of amusement and challenge, intrigued Blake more than he wanted to admit. For the first time in months, his phone remained untouched on the table. "That's a cryptic answer," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Are you going to make me guess? Where would be the fun in telling you outright?" She sipped her martini. "But I'll give you until the end of dinner to figure it out." It was a game, Blake realized, one he hadn't been expecting. His life had become predictable despite its luxury, problems that could be solved with money or power, people who wanted something from him. This woman offered neither deference nor obvious motive. "Challenge accepted," he said, surprised to find himself genuinely smiling. "Though I should warn you, I have an excellent memory for faces." "We'll see." Amelia picked up the menu. "Shall we order? I hear the duck confit here is life-changing." As they moved through dinner, Blake found himself increasingly puzzled and increasingly captivated. Amelia was knowledgeable about technology and business, but spoke more passionately about literature and art. She asked insightful questions about his company's renewable energy projects, but steered the conversation away from his wealth or status. She was funny without trying too hard, elegant without being stiff. And there was something about the way she listened, fully present, that made Blake realize how rare that quality had become in his life. And still, he couldn't place her. "You grew up in Boston?" he asked, trying to find some connection. "Connecticut," she corrected. "But I lived in Boston for a while. college and a few years after. Harvard? Boston University, English literature, and then a master's in education. Not his alma mater then. Blake had done his undergrad and MBA at Harvard, where family connections and money had smoothed his path. He tried another angle. "And what do you do now, Amelia Bryant?" A slight hesitation. "I'm a teacher, high school English." Blake couldn't hide his surprise. His sister had set him up with a high school teacher. Hannah usually tried to match him with models, executives, or the occasional aristocrat, people she thought moved in his orbit. "You seem surprised," Amelia noted, amusement dancing in her eyes. "I am a little," Blake admitted. "My sister usually has a certain type in mind for me." "And what type is that?" "Trophy wives," he said bluntly, then regretted his candor as Amelia's eyebrows rose. "I'm sorry, that was honest," she finished for him. "It's refreshing, actually." She set down her fork and looked at him directly. "And what are you looking for, Blake Morrison? Another trophy wife or something else?" The question caught him off guard. What was he looking for? He'd been so consumed with building his business after the divorce that he hadn't really considered what might come next. His ex-wife Victoria had been beautiful, socially connected, and ultimately more interested in his money than in him. The divorce had been expensive but painless. There had been little emotional connection to sever. "I'm not sure," he answered truthfully. "I agreed to this dinner because my sister wouldn't stop badgering me, not because I'm actively looking for anything." "Honesty again? You're on a roll." Amelia smiled, but there was something sad in it now. "And yet you can't place me." "I'm still working on it," Blake said, studying her face again. "Give me a hint." Amelia seemed to consider this. "We met in Boston. I was different then. Life hadn't quite hardened me yet." Boston narrowed it down, but not enough. Blake had spent 8 years there between college and graduate school, and the early days of his first startup. As dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate soufflé that Amelia had insisted they share, Blake felt an unfamiliar sensation. He didn't want the evening to end. For the first time in years, he'd spent hours without checking his phone or thinking about work. This woman with the familiar green eyes had pulled him out of his usual orbit, and he found himself reluctant to return to it. "Time's almost up," Amelia said as she set down her spoon. "Last chance to place me in your illustrious past." Blake shook his head, frustrated and intrigued in equal measure. "I concede defeat. You have me at a disadvantage, Amelia Bryant." She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable passing across her face. Then she reached into her small purse and pulled out a worn photograph, sliding it across the table. "Perhaps this will help," she said quietly. Blake picked up the photo. It showed a group of young people, college-aged, standing on the steps of a brick building he recognized as part of the Boston University campus. His eyes scanned the faces until he spotted a younger version of Amelia, her hair much longer then, her face rounder and more carefree, her arm thrown around the shoulders of a thin young man with tousled brown hair and glasses who was looking at her with undisguised adoration, a young man who was unmistakably him, before wealth, before success, before he became Blake Morrison, tech billionaire. Blake looked up, stunned, the memories suddenly rushing back. "Amanda," he whispered. "Amanda Taylor. Amanda Taylor," Blake repeated, the name stirring dormant memories. "You changed your name." "I did," she confirmed, her green eyes watching him carefully. "Amelia Bryant has been me for almost 15 years now." Blake stared at the photograph, transported back to a life he rarely thought about anymore, the skinny, ambitious kid with second-hand clothes and a scholarship to Harvard, working evenings at a coffee shop near Boston University to make ends meet. The pretty literature student who always ordered a large chai tea and sat by the window, reading poetry volumes and leaving generous tips despite her own obvious budget constraints. "You were chai tea girl," Blake said, the memories crystallizing. "I used to save the good muffins for you." A genuine smile spread across her face. "You remember that?" "I do now." Blake was astonished by the rush of details returning to him. "You were writing your thesis on Sylvia Plath. You always wore this green scarf even indoors. You used to leave little notes with literary quotes instead of writing on the tip line." Amanda, looked pleased and surprised. "I didn't think you'd remember all that." "We dated," Blake said, the reality of it hitting him fully. For nearly a year. Her smile faded slightly. We did. Blake's mind raced through fragmented memories, study sessions where he'd bring leftover pastries from the coffee shop, walks along the Charles River, her tiny apartment with books stacked everywhere, passionate discussions about his business ideas while she listened attentively, her unwavering belief that he could succeed when everyone else thought he was dreaming too big, and then nothing. A void where the ending should be. "What happened to us?" he asked, genuinely unable to recall how their relationship had concluded. Amelia's expression cooled slightly. "You really don't remember?" Blake felt suddenly uncomfortable, sensing he was missing something important. "It was a chaotic time. I was starting my first company, working around the clock." "Your first startup, Morris Tech Solutions," she nodded. "You got your first round of serious funding." $2 million from Apex Ventures, Blake confirmed. That had been the beginning, the first stepping stone to what would eventually become Morrison Technologies, now valued at over $70 billion. "And then you disappeared," Amelia said quietly. "No calls, no explanation. Just gone." Blake felt a chill of recognition. There had been casualties in his rise to success, relationships sacrificed on the altar of ambition, but the specific circumstances of this one had been buried under years of forward momentum. "I got consumed by the business," he offered, knowing even as he said it that it was an insufficient explanation. "You got consumed by Brian Westfield and his country club crowd," Amelia corrected him, her tone matter-of-fact rather than bitter. "Your first investor didn't just offer money. He offered entry into a world you'd always wanted to be part of." Blake remembered Brian Westfield. Silver-haired, Ivy League pedigree going back generations, connections throughout the venture capital world. The man who had not just funded his ideas, but had remade Blake himself, introducing him to the right people, suggesting the right clothes, teaching him the unwritten rules of wealth and power. "Brian took me under his wing," Blake acknowledged. "It was a crucial time for the company." "He told you I wasn't suitable," Amelia said. "Not for the future he envisioned for you. A scholarship kid from a no-name town with a public school education was already starting at a disadvantage. You couldn't afford additional liabilities." The word hung between them, and Blake felt a wave of shame as more memories surfaced. Brian's careful suggestions about appropriate connections and strategic relationships. The gradually increasing demands on his time that made seeing Amanda impossible. The decision, which had seemed so necessary then, to fully commit to his new path. "I was a coward," Blake admitted, meeting her eyes directly. "I should have told you to your face." Amelia nodded, accepting this truth. "Yes, you should have." She took a sip of water. "Instead, I waited for calls that never came. I went to the coffee shop where you no longer worked. I even went to your apartment, but you'd moved out." "I moved to Brian's guest house in Beacon Hill," Blake said, the full weight of his callousness becoming clear to him. "It was closer to our new offices. 3 months we were together, and you couldn't spare 5 minutes to break up with me properly." There was no anger in her voice, just a statement of fact that made it somehow worse. "Do you know what that does to a person? To be erased like that?" Blake felt genuinely ashamed. "I'm sorry, Amanda. Amelia. I was young and ambitious and selfish." "Yes, you were." She folded her napkin precisely. "But that was nearly 20 years ago. Ancient history." Blake studied her, puzzled. "Then why arrange this dinner? Why use a different name? You could have told my sister who you really were." Amelia's expression was unreadable. "Would you have agreed to see me if you'd known?" "Probably not," he admitted. "There's your answer." She leaned back in her chair. "Besides, I was curious. I wanted to see what became of the boy I knew, the one who had dreams of changing the world with sustainable technology, who talked about solving real problems instead of just making money." "And?" Blake asked, feeling strangely vulnerable. "What's your verdict?" "The jury's still out." Her gaze was appraising. "Your company has done remarkable things with renewable energy storage. Your technology has genuinely advanced clean energy adoption worldwide. But," Blake sensed there was more, "but you've become exactly what Brian Westfield wanted you to be." She gestured around the exclusive restaurant. The custom suits, the right address, the carefully curated public image. The Blake I knew wanted to make a difference. "This Blake," she gestured to him, "seems more concerned with making the Forbes list." Her words stung because they contained more truth than he wanted to admit. Somewhere along the way, the idealism that had driven his initial vision had been diluted by the trappings of success. "That's not entirely fair," he said. "Our technology has reduced carbon emissions by millions of tons. We've made renewable energy viable in places that were completely dependent on fossil fuels." "I know," she acknowledged. "That's why the jury's still out. There are still glimpses of that idealistic boy in what your company does, if not in how you present yourself to the world." She tilted her head. "Did you ever build that low-cost battery system for developing nations you used to talk about? The one that could power a rural medical clinic or school?" Blake fell silent. That particular dream, providing affordable energy storage to the world's poorest regions, had been shelved years ago as not commercially viable. It remained on some distant roadmap, perpetually pushed back in favor of more profitable ventures. "We're working on similar initiatives," he said finally. Amelia's expression suggested she saw through the corporate speak. "Why teaching?" Blake asked, wanting to shift the focus from his choices to hers. "You were brilliant. You could have done anything." A genuine smile transformed her face. "I did do anything. I do everything. I introduce teenagers to worlds they've never imagined through literature. I watch minds open and perspectives shift. I help young people find their voices." Her passion was evident in every word. "Not everything of value generates billions in revenue, Blake." Blake felt properly chastened and strangely moved by her conviction. "Your students are fortunate." "Some of them think so," she acknowledged with a soft laugh. "Others would rather be anywhere else. That's teaching for you." A comfortable silence fell between them. Blake realized that despite the uncomfortable revelations, he was enjoying himself more than he had in any social situation in recent memory. "Why now?" he asked finally. "After all these years?" Amelia hesitated, something vulnerable crossing her face. The honest answer: "I saw your sister's post in a Facebook matchmaking group. She was looking for intelligent, grounded women tired of the usual dating scene for her brilliant but workaholic brother." The irony was too delicious to resist. "Hannah and her projects," Blake said with a sigh. "She means well." "She does," Amelia agreed, "but there's more to it." She seemed to debate with herself before continuing. "My mother died last month. Cancer." "I'm sorry," Blake said, meaning it. "Going through her things, I found some old photos, including that one." She nodded toward the photograph still on the table between them. "It made me think about paths not taken, opportunities missed. About forgiveness, too." "Forgiveness," Blake repeated. "I spent years being angry at you," she admitted. "But life's too short for holding on to old grievances. I thought perhaps we could both use some closure." The waiter approached discreetly. "Would you care for anything else this evening?" Blake looked at Amelia, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation. "Would you like to continue this somewhere else? There's a quiet bar at the St. Regis just down the street." She studied him, seeming to weigh something in her mind, then nodded. "I'd like that." The King Cole Bar at the St. Regis was an institution in New York. Dark wood, soft lighting, and the famous Maxfield Parish mural behind the bar. Despite the Tuesday evening, the place hummed with quiet conversation from well-dressed patrons. Blake guided Amelia to a secluded corner table with a subtle nod to the maître d', who clearly recognized him. "I take it you come here often?" Amelia asked as they settled into the plush velvet chairs. "It's convenient for business meetings," Blake replied. "Private enough for sensitive discussions, public enough to keep things professional." A server appeared immediately. Blake ordered a Balvenie 21, while Amelia requested a glass of Barolo. "So closure," Blake said once they were alone again. "Is that really all you wanted from tonight?" Amelia traced the edge of the table with her finger. "Perhaps curiosity too. The boy I knew has become one of the richest men in America. It's natural to wonder about the journey." "The official story is everywhere," Blake said. "Magazine profiles, a terrible, unauthorized biography, countless business school case studies." "I'm not interested in the official story," Amelia replied. "I want to know if you're happy, Blake." The question, so simple and yet so profound, caught him off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked him that? His sister worried about his workload and his lack of a personal life. His executive team concerned themselves with his strategic vision, his board with quarterly results. But happiness? That wasn't a metric anyone tracked. I'm successful, he answered cautiously. That's not what I asked. Blake swirled the amber liquid in his glass, buying time. Happiness is a luxury I haven't focused on. There's always been the next goal, the next acquisition, the next breakthrough. The next rung on a ladder with no top, Amelia observed. Their drinks arrived, creating a momentary reprieve from her penetrating gaze. Blake found himself strangely defensive, yet also relieved to be having a conversation of substance with someone who had no agenda. "What about you?" he countered. "Are you happy, Amelia Bryant, formerly Amanda Taylor?" She considered this, taking a sip of her wine. "Most days. I have work I believe in, students who challenge me, good friends, a small apartment in Brooklyn filled with books and plants and jazz records." A soft smile played at her lips. "It's not a billion-dollar empire, but it's a life with meaning. It sounds peaceful," Blake said, surprised by the wistfulness in his own voice. "Sometimes. Other times it's chaotic and frustrating and overwhelming," her green eyes fixed on his. "But it's real. Every bit of it." "When was the last time something felt real to you, Blake?" The question hit him like a physical blow. When indeed? His world was curated and controlled. Luxury homes he barely spent time in, relationships negotiated like business deals, even his charitable giving managed by a team to maximize PR value. "This does," he admitted quietly. "Sitting here with you, being seen as the person I was before all this, it feels real." Something shifted in Amelia's expression, a softening, a glimpse of the young woman who had once believed in him completely. "Tell me something true," she said. Something not in the official Blake Morrison narrative. Blake found himself speaking before he could think better of it. "I hate most of my life," he confessed. "The endless meetings, the political maneuvering, the constant performance of being Blake Morrison, tech visionary." He took a generous sip of his scotch. "The only time I feel alive is when I'm actually working on the technology, which I barely get to do anymore. Then why continue? Momentum, expectation, fear of what's on the other side." He shrugged. "The company employs thousands of people. Their livelihoods depend on me maintaining the facade." "That's quite a burden to carry," Amelia said without judgment. "What about you?" Blake asked. "Tell me something true about Amelia Bryant." She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "I kept that green scarf you mentioned. It's frayed and faded, but I couldn't bear to part with it. Sentimental value. It was the first gift anyone had given me that showed they were really paying attention." Her voice softened. "You noticed I was always cold in that coffee shop, even when it was warm outside. You saved up tips for 3 weeks to buy it from that boutique on Newbury Street." Blake remembered now, the way her face had lit up when he presented her with the carefully wrapped package, how she'd worn it every day afterward despite it being spring. He'd forgotten he was capable of such thoughtful gestures. "Whatever happened to the poetry?" he asked. "You were always writing." A shadow crossed her face. "I still write. I've published 2 collections with a small press." "Under Amanda Taylor or Amelia Bryant?" "A.J. Bryant," she said. "They didn't exactly make the New York Times bestseller list, but they exist in the world." "I'd like to read them," Blake said, surprising himself with his sincerity. "Would you?" She looked skeptical. "They're rather critical of capitalist excess and the hollowness of material success." Blake laughed, the sound startling in its genuineness. "So not flattering to people like me?" "Not particularly," she admitted with a smile, "though there might be a few poems inspired by a certain ambitious coffee shop barista who broke my heart. Now I definitely need to read them." Blake's phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it, another first for the evening. As the night deepened, they moved from cautious reminiscence to more personal territory. Amelia told him about her brief failed marriage to a fellow teacher, her struggle with her mother's long illness, her upcoming sabbatical to write her 3rd collection. Blake shared his growing disillusionment with the corporate world he'd fought so hard to conquer, his regrets about his distant relationship with his parents before they died, his increasing desire to return to the hands-on innovation that had first driven him. "You could step back, you know," Amelia suggested. "You've built an incredible team. Let them handle the day-to-day while you focus on the work that fulfills you." "It's not that simple," Blake began, then stopped himself. "Actually, maybe it is that simple, and I've just been too afraid to consider it." "What are you afraid of?" "Irrelevance," he admitted. "Without Blake Morrison, billionaire CEO, who am I?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Amelia said gently. "Maybe it's time to find out." They were interrupted by a discreet cough. The maitre d' stood at their table looking apologetic. "I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, Mr. Morrison, but there's a situation that requires your attention." He handed Blake a folded note. Blake opened it reluctantly. Inside, in his sister Hannah's handwriting, "Emergency board call, Palmer threatening hostile move, call me now." Thomas Palmer was his chief competitor and had been circling Morrison Technologies for months, looking for an opening. Blake felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders. "I need to take this," he said to Amelia, genuine regret in his voice. "It's an emergency," she finished for him, her smile tinged with sadness. Some things never change. The comment stung, but Blake couldn't deny its accuracy. "I'm sorry. Can I have my driver take you home?" "I can manage," she said, gathering her purse. "It's been an illuminating evening, Blake. Thank you for the closure." Something in her tone, finality, made Blake reach for her hand. "Don't disappear, please. I'd like to see you again." Amelia looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "Why?" "Because for the first time in years, I remembered who I wanted to be before I became who I am," he said simply. "Because you're the only person in my life who sees both versions of me and isn't impressed by the wrong one." She seemed to struggle with herself before finally saying, "I'm leaving for Italy on Friday. A writing retreat in Tuscany for my sabbatical. I'll be gone for 3 months. Friday," Blake repeated, his mind already calculating. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night. One more evening before you go." "Blake, please." He squeezed her hand gently. "No restaurants, no interruptions. I'll cook for you myself." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You cook now?" "No," he admitted with a grin. "But I have about 24 hours to learn, don't I?" A reluctant smile spread across her face. "You always did like impossible challenges." "Is that a yes?" Amelia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but I'm not coming to some sterile penthouse. If you're cooking for me, it should be somewhere that matters to you. Somewhere real." Blake thought quickly. "I have a place in Connecticut, a farmhouse I bought 5 years ago. No staff, no security systems, no Blake Morrison trappings. Just me, occasionally, when I need to remember who I am." "Connecticut," Amelia repeated, looking intrigued. "Where?" "Mystic. Near the coast." Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Surprise. "Send me the address," she said finally. "I'll be there at 7. As Blake watched her walk away, he felt both lighter and more disoriented than he had in years. The urgent board situation demanded his attention, yet all he could think about was the challenge of preparing a meal for a woman who had known him when he had nothing but dreams and determination, a woman who somehow still saw that person beneath the wealth and power he'd accumulated. His phone buzzed again, insistently. With a deep breath, Blake turned away from Amelia's retreating figure and stepped back into his carefully constructed world, already counting the hours until he could escape it again. The Palmer crisis had kept Blake working through the night, a hostile takeover attempt that required all his strategic acumen to neutralize. By morning, the immediate threat was contained, but Blake had cancelled 3 meetings and delegated his afternoon schedule to his COO, something he'd never done outside of family emergencies. This felt equally important. The drive to Mystic took just over 2 hours from Manhattan. As the sleek Aston Martin left the highway for increasingly narrow coastal roads, Blake felt the knots in his shoulders begin to loosen. The familiar landscape of Connecticut's shoreline, rocky beaches, weathered cedar-shingled houses, glimpses of blue water between trees, had always centered him in ways his other homes never could. The farmhouse sat on 3 acres overlooking Long Island Sound, a 19th century structure he'd restored rather than renovated. No smart home technology, no modernist additions, just honest craftsmanship and materials that had stood for generations. Blake had preserved its imperfections, the slightly uneven floors, the door that required a firm push in winter, the window seat worn smooth by generations of dreamers gazing out at the water. Blake parked in the gravel drive and sat for a moment, letting the silence wash over him. This place represented a road not taken, a simpler life he occasionally visited but never fully embraced. Today, it felt like exactly where he needed to be. Inside, sunlight streamed through wavy antique glass, casting patterns on wide plank pine floors. Blake moved through the rooms, opening windows to release the slight mustiness of disuse. The house welcomed him back without judgment or expectation. In the kitchen, updated with professional appliances but keeping its farmhouse character, Blake unpacked the ingredients he'd had delivered from a local market. The cooking lessons had been virtual and rushed, but he'd chosen a menu that could forgive his inexperience. Fresh scallops from Stonington Harbour, locally grown asparagus, heirloom tomato salad with herbs from the garden, and a chocolate cake from Mystic's Best Bakery. He wasn't foolish enough to attempt dessert. As he washed vegetables and marinated the scallops, Blake realized he was nervous, genuinely uncomfortably nervous in a way he hadn't been since pitching to his first major investors. The Blake Morrison who commanded boardrooms and dazzled the tech world had disappeared, leaving behind the uncertain young man who had once saved the best muffins for a pretty literature student. At 6:30, Blake showered and changed into jeans and a simple blue button-down, the most casual outfit he'd worn in public in years. He opened a bottle of white wine to breathe and lit candles on the porch overlooking the water. The evening was clear and mild, perfect for dining outside. The crunch of tires on gravel announced her arrival precisely at 7. Blake took a deep breath and went to meet her, feeling strangely as though he was about to face a moment of judgment far more significant than any business negotiation. Amelia stepped out of a modest hybrid car, looking different from the previous evening, more relaxed in wide-leg linen pants and a simple blouse, her hair loosely tied back. She carried a small gift bag and a bouquet of wildflowers. "You found it," Blake said, immediately feeling foolish for stating the obvious. "I did." Amelia looked past him to the farmhouse, her expression unreadable. "It's beautiful." "Thank you, it's not what people expect when they hear Blake Morrison's house." "Which is exactly why you love it," she observed, handing him the flowers. "These are from a roadside stand about a mile back. They're perfect." Blake accepted them, noticing how their casual beauty complemented the setting far better than some expensive florist arrangement. He led her inside, watching her take in the exposed beams, the well-worn furniture, the bookshelves filled with his actual reading material rather than decoratively selected volumes. "This is real," she said finally, turning to him with genuine surprise. "I thought it might be some wealthy person's idea of rustic, all reclaimed wood and designer distressing. But this is an actual home." "It is," Blake acknowledged, "though I don't spend nearly enough time here." "Why did you buy it?" Blake hesitated, then decided on honesty. "It reminded me of the stories my grandfather used to tell about growing up in a place like this, connected to the land, to the seasons. His family lost their farm during the Depression. So the boy who wanted to solve real problems hasn't completely disappeared," Amelia said softly. "He hides, but he's still in here somewhere." Blake gestured toward the porch. "Would you like a glass of wine while I finish cooking?" Amelia raised an eyebrow. "You're actually cooking? I assumed that was a figure of speech and you'd have staff here." "No staff," Blake assured her. "Just me, attempting not to burn down this very flammable antique house." Her laugh was warm and genuine. "In that case, I'd better supervise." The kitchen became a shared space as Blake seared scallops while Amelia dressed the salad. The awkwardness between them gradually dissolved into an easy rhythm, punctuated by brushed shoulders, and the occasional guidance from Amelia when Blake looked lost. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked, as she expertly adjusted the heat under his pan. "My grandmother. She believed no education was complete without knowing how to feed yourself properly." Amelia looked around the kitchen appreciatively. She would have loved this space. "Tell me about your life," Blake said as they carried their plates to the porch. "The real version, not the first date overview." Under the darkening sky, with the sound of waves in the distance, Amelia shared stories of her teaching career, the triumphs and heartbreaks, the budget cuts and bureaucratic battles, the students who kept her believing in the power of education despite it all. She spoke of her writing process, the small but devoted following her poetry had gathered, her dreams of eventually opening a bookshop cafe when she retired from teaching. "The cafe part is probably your influence," she admitted. "I still associate the smell of coffee with possibility." As night fell completely, Blake lit the fire pit on the edge of the porch, and they moved closer to its warmth with fresh glasses of wine. "I've talked enough," Amelia said, tucking her feet under her on the cushioned chair. "Tell me about this place. Why Connecticut? Why Mystic?" Blake gazed into the flames. "Would you believe it was completely unintentional? I was driving back from a conference in Boston 5 years ago and took the coastal route on a whim. Stopped in Mystic for lunch, saw a "for sale" sign, and found myself calling the realtor before I'd even finished my coffee. Impulse purchase? That doesn't sound like the strategic Blake Morrison I read about. It was more like recognition, Blake tried to explain. I walked through this house and thought, this is what I've been looking for without knowing I was looking for it. Amelia nodded thoughtfully. Those moments are rare. She set down her wineglass and reached for the small gift bag she'd brought. I have something for you. Blake accepted the bag, surprised. Inside was a slim volume with a blue cover, Remembered Light by A.J. Bryant. Your poetry, he said, genuinely touched. My second collection. It came out last year. She looked slightly embarrassed. Page 47 might interest you. Blake turned to the page and found a poem titled The Barista's Dream. He read it silently, his throat tightening as he recognized references to their shared past, the coffee shop, his ambitious plans, the way they'd once imagined a future together. This isn't angry, he said, looking up at her. I thought you said your poems were critical of people like me. Some are, she acknowledged. But that one is about possibility, about the roads we choose and the ones we don't. Thank you, Blake said, carefully closing the book. I'll read all of it. Blake, Amelia said after a moment, her expression serious. Can I ask you something? Something I've wondered for 20 years? Anything. Say if Brian Westfield hadn't come along with his money and his country club connections, if you'd had to build your company the hard way, one step at a time, do you think we would have had a chance? The question hung between them, heavy with 2 decades of divergent lives and missed opportunities. I've asked myself that same question more times than I can count, Blake admitted, especially in the last 24 hours. And? I think we had something real, he said slowly. Something I was too young and too ambitious to recognize the value of. I traded what could have been profound happiness for success because I didn't understand they weren't mutually exclusive. Amelia nodded, accepting his answer. For what it's worth, I think you would have succeeded either way. The drive was always in you, but I might have remained the person you believed in, rather than becoming someone even I don't particularly like most days. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks upward to mingle with the emerging stars. Why did you change your name? Blake asked suddenly. You never explained that. Amelia looked away toward the dark water. After you disappeared from my life, I had a difficult time. Depression, anxiety. I was questioning everything about myself, including my worth as a writer. She took a deep breath. When I finally started putting myself back together, I wanted a fresh start. Amelia was my grandmother's name, Bryant my mother's maiden name. It felt like claiming a new identity rooted in the women who had always believed in me. I'm sorry I hurt you, Blake said quietly. We were young, she replied, and maybe things worked out exactly as they needed to. I've had a good life, Blake, different from what I imagined back then, but meaningful. And now you're off to Italy. Yes, 3 months in a villa outside Florence with 9 other writers. Her eyes lit up at the prospect. Time to focus completely on my next collection. Blake hesitated, then asked the question that had been building since he first recognized her. When you return, would you consider seeing me again? Amelia studied him. To what end, Blake? We live in completely different worlds now. Do we? He gestured to the farmhouse, the simple meal they'd shared. Maybe this is where our worlds could overlap. A billionaire playing at simplicity is still a billionaire, she pointed out gently. What if I wasn't playing? Blake leaned forward. What if I told you I've been thinking about stepping back from Morrison Technologies for years, becoming chairman, but letting my team run daily operations while I return to the innovation work I actually love? I'd say talk is cheap, Amelia replied, though her tone was kind. People rarely change fundamentally, Blake. They do when they recognize they've been on the wrong path. Blake reached for her hand. Seeing you again, it's like being offered a compass when I didn't even realize I was lost. Amelia didn't pull her hand away, but her expression remained cautious. One dinner doesn't erase 20 years of choices. No, Blake agreed, but it can be the first step toward making different ones. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of possibility between them. 3 months, Amelia finally said. Go be Blake Morrison, tech billionaire, while I'm in Italy. If you still feel this way when I get back, if you've actually taken concrete steps toward this change you're talking about, call me. I will, Blake promised. And I'll be different. Amelia smiled, a mixture of hope and skepticism in her eyes. We'll see. As the fire burned down to embers, they talked of smaller things, favorite books, places they'd traveled, memories of Boston in the spring. When Amelia finally stood to leave, Blake walked her to her car, aware that whatever happened next would depend entirely on the choices he made while she was gone. Safe travels, he said, as she opened her car door. Write something beautiful in Italy. I will. She hesitated, then stood on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. And Blake? Whatever you decide to do next, make sure it's real. As her taillights disappeared down the winding drive, Blake stood in the starlight, feeling both loss and possibility. The farmhouse waited behind him, patient, authentic, a vision of a life he'd kept at arm's length for too long. Tomorrow, the Blake Morrison the world knew would begin to transform. Tonight, in the quiet of the Connecticut shore, that transformation had already begun.